Hey guys, it's Eamon. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Game 9 of the World Championship match between Vasily Smyslov and Mikhail Botvinnik. So these two great players would play three World Championship matches together, and this was the first one in 1954. At this point in the match, Smyslov was down 2 points, and I find the clash of styles between these two players really interesting. Smyslov very much considered himself an artist at the board. He had a beautiful singing voice, and he described how he'd always search for truth in chess positions. Meanwhile, Botvinnik was extremely disciplined. He believed in rigorous physical preparation and psychological preparation for a specific opponent in a match. He also had a very narrow but very sharp opening repertoire. So in this ninth game of the match, Smyslov opens with e4, and Botvinnik plays e6, the French defense. And Botvinnik was a huge exponent of the French defense. He pioneered a lot of different variations at the time. And after d4, d5, knight c3 invites the Winawer variation, and Botvinnik goes for it. So this move, bishop b4, is the Winawer variation, and it's extremely a sharp variation. e5 closes the center, and c5 strikes back at the closed center. Now a3, and this forces this important dark square bishop into a decision. In this game, Botvinnik plays bishop a5, which is less common. Normally, black takes on c3 and immediately gives white these double pawns on c3. But in this game, he goes for bishop a5 and b4. So this move was popularized by Alexander Alekhine, the world champion. And the point is that after c takes b4, then knight b5 is a strong reply. And if b takes a 3 check after c3, white has a good lead in development here. You can see this knight is threatening to come into d6, and this bishop can often recapture on a3 in many variations. So c takes b4 would not be a very strong move. C takes d4 is the move played in the game. And now queen g4. So there's some tension between this hanging knight on c3 and the hanging bishop on b4, but at the moment neither side wants to resolve that tension, and instead Smyslov counterattacks this weak g7 pawn. You can see since this bishop has left the dark squares on the king side, that leaves this g7 pawn unprotected, and this is a really common idea in the Winawer variation. The queen comes out to g4 and attacks g7. Now knight e7. So Botvinnik has to prepare to meet the threat of queen d7. And now b takes a5. B takes c3, so these minor pieces get exchanged. And this is a favorable situation for black on the king side. This a5 pawn is extremely weak, and it's probably going to be picked up by queen takes a5 at some point. And this pawn on c3 can be a long-term asset. But black loses this g7 pawn, and white gets some active play on the king side. Now rook g8 attacks the queen, and queen takes h7. So how do we assess this situation? White has this strong dark square bishop, which is going to be a long-term asset, but he's slightly behind in development, and the situation on the queen side isn't too favorable for him. Black is going to have free development on the queen side. Now knight d7 was played, and Smyslov is critical of this move. He says, this move with the idea of playing the knight to f8 does not appeal to me. In a short position, every tempo is especially precious. These days, knight bc6 is the main theoretical move. And after knight f3, the, the game is roughly balanced. Instead, knight d7 was played, and knight f3, and knight f8. So often it carries out his idea of transferring this knight over to the king side to kick the queen back to d3. Nowadays, the main theoretical move is queen c7, but Smyslov says that after bishop b5, white has a good game. Instead, knight f8 and queen d3 was played, and queen takes a5. Smyslov now goes for h4, and this move does a couple things. We notice this is last pawn. There's no pawns that can oppose this strong pawn. But more importantly than just pushing a passed pawn, it secures this outpost on g5. And this is going to be an important outpost for white later in the game, either for the knight or, more importantly, the dark square bishop is going to be able to assert its dominance. Bishop b7, bishop d7, and bishop g5. Smyslov says about this position, the bishop takes up a highly favorable post from where it not only prevents castling, but also achieves complete domination of the weakened dark squares. And this is the main drawback of playing the Winawer variation with an early bishop b4 in the French, is black has set up his pawns on light squares, and so this dark square bishop is pretty crucial for defending those dark squares. Now rook c8 and knight d4. So the knight comes to the natural centralization square on d4 and knight f5. And now white has a couple different options. Taking on f5 would not be so good because after e takes f5, even though black's pawn structure is fractured here, this knight on f8 would gain an important post on e6. So instead, Smyslov plays rook b1. And he says about this position, in order to evaluate this apparently modest move and its true worth, a deep study of the position is required. Black has renewed the threat of rook c4, and would also like to exchange the light square bishops by knight takes d4 and bishop b5. So for example, uh, if instead of rook b1, white were to play the natural bishop e2 here, black has the plan of exchanging on d4 and then playing bishop b5, which would exchange off his so-called bad bishop. This light square bishop is definitely black's bad bishop because it's blocked by these central pawns. And it would exchange off this bishop for a good defender of white's king in the e2 bishop. So in order to prevent the exchange of light square bishops, Smyslov plays rook b1, controlling the b5 square, but it does undefend a3. So the position could become sharp. Now Botvinnik plays rook c4, which Smyslov describes as a fatal error. Instead, he should have tried b6, which just protects this hanging b7 pawn. And after g4, knight takes b4, queen takes, and then queen takes a3. Black now also obtains a passed pawn in his a pawn, but after bishop d3, white's advantage is undisputed because of the long-term weakness of these dark squares, as well as his passed h pawn, which is farther advanced than black's passed a pawn on the other side of the board. So in this position, Botvinnik should have tried b6. Instead, he went rook c4, which looks very active. The rook is often going to have ideas of playing rook e4 check, disturbing white's king in the center. Now knight takes f5, e takes f5, and rook b7. So white picks up this pawn, excuse me, on b7, and rook e4 check. So since white's king is still in the center, black aims to disturb this. However, he'd overlooked the very elegant solution in this position. Queen takes e4. Beautiful queen sacrifice. And it has a very succinct tactical point. So whichever way the queen is taken, in this case, Botvinnik took with the d pawn. Now rook b8 check, bishop c8, and bishop b5 entombs black's king in a mating net. You can see these bishops are beautiful, just destroying the king in the center here. Of course, not bishop c8, rook takes c8 would be a huge blunder here, because after king d7, now the king is escaping from the mating net. And after, for example, rook d8, king c7, there's no mating net, and white has given up his queen for not enough compensation. So instead, bishop b5 check, and this forces black to give up the queen on b5. The only other legal move here would be knight d7, but after rook takes c8, mate is soon to follow. So bishop e5 check, queen takes, rook takes, and now white is completely winning in this endgame. He's up the exchange and still has this asset of his passed h-pawn. Knight e6 was played, but bishop f6. White continues to exploit the dominance of this dark square bishop. Rook takes g2 and h5. And there's no way for black to oppose this h-pawn. This pawn is much too strong. Bishop a6. But now h6 was the final move of the game. There's no way to stop this pawn. If, for example, bishop takes e5, simply h7, and the pawn is going to become a new queen. So after h6, like I said, Botvinnik resigned. Really pretty game from Smyslov, short and sweet, and this very pretty idea of queen takes e4, and then entombing black's king in a mating net wrapped the game up nicely. So that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and also check out my link for coaching down in the description. I offer private lessons, so if you want to check out my coaching page, please click the link in the description. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.